Black and White with Arab News, our unique NUFC podcast.
Newcastle think it should be. 54th minute. Burn, what a ball to release Isak, two in the middle. Here's a big chance, and a chance that's been put away by who else but Callum Wilson.
And it's the big one. It's the one that our sports editor, Ali Khaled, he's pinpointed it over the last couple of months, and the big weekend has finally arrived. So who better to chat through it with than Super Kevin Campbell, born on the North Bank, and we'll be getting his views on that big game soon. But first, and as always, Ali is with us. AK, before we get on to the Premier League and the Newcastle and Arsenal, the Champions League and the title, it's been a massive week, and it continues as we look forward to the AFC Champions League second leg. Our very own Al Hilal involved.
Yes, the big game is the Champions League final in Asia, the AFC Champions League final between Al Hilal of Saudi Arabia, who are the reigning champions. It's massive, Pete. It's the biggest game in Asian football, and really in international football as well. There's a lot more interest in it these days. It's Al Hilal of Saudi Arabia, who are the reigning champions, and against Urawa Reds of Japan. And those teams have played in three, including this one. They've played three of the last five finals. So they've dominated. The first leg in Riyadh finished 1-1. It was a bit disappointing for Al Hilal because they were leading 1-0, and a defensive mistake sort of gave away the equaliser. They couldn't take the lead again. And to make things matters worse, their star player, Salam Al-Dosari, who scored the winning goal against Argentina in the World Cup for Saudi Arabia, was sent off a few minutes. So he's going to miss the second leg. Second leg is on Saturday. Expect another massive crowd in Japan. Should be really, really tight. And hopefully Al Hilal will win, and it'll be a record-extending title, fifth title, if they win it. But it couldn't be tougher, really. They've left themselves a really tough job because it's 1-1. Salam Al-Dosari is out. They've got a couple other injury concerns. But should be interesting. Big game for people to keep an eye out on.
Funny you mention Al Hilal because they cropped up in a friend's WhatsApp group competition this week. Sent me a fascinating article about the top 20 teams in the world who have the most silverware, shall we say. And it is, you look at there's the Brazilians, you've got your Corinthians, you've got your Glasgow Celtics, your Rangers, but Al Hilal up there. Fascinating article, brilliant stuff. Look forward to that one, and let's hope that that Al Hilal can secure a victory in the second leg. Like you say, maybe disappointing, but you just never know. It's a funny old game, someone said.
We're definitely not writing them off, but could have been a little bit more comfortable had they won the game. And obviously, Salam Al-Dosari's suspension, they've left themselves a bit of a job. But hopefully they'll come through it. It's always good when it's good for Saudi Arabia football. It's good for Gulf football, for Middle East football when one of the Arab teams wins the Asian Champions League.
We saw that in the World Cup, Ali, and it was absolutely fantastic. Okay, and next up for the tune, it's Arsenal, so it's a quick welcome back to Super Kevin Campbell with his Gunners hat on, of course. Grew up on the North Bank, did our guest Kevin Campbell. Super Kev, welcome back. Before we look at Sunday's massive game for both sides, just a quick recap. Newcastle, they got it done, didn't they, against the Saints?
Yeah, they did, Pete. And you know what? You saw Southampton make life difficult in the first half, especially.
Big time.
They're not a bad side. If they can get a grip of the game, they're not a bad side. And they've got a really good player in that Lavia in midfield. Very, very good little player who could get himself out of tight spots. He's young, but he's very good. And you know what, Pete? Southampton taking the lead. I think shocked St. James's Park, if I'm honest with you. It kind of kept Newcastle down. They didn't have the same energy as they normally have. But, fair play to Southampton. They made life difficult. But, Pete, second half, I've got to say, Eddie Howe, I don't know what they put in that Geordie tea, mate, but they got it going. They lit the fire. And what a great move. He took Gordon off and he brought on Isak. Isak on that left-hand side. And he's a handful at the worst of times, Pete. But when he's up for it like he is now, he proves to be a difference maker. And Callum Wilson's in a rich vein of form. You find him ways out to play both of them together, Pete, and getting maximum output. I just thought you steamrolled Southampton second half. And listen, there were what is it? I said 4-1, didn't I? And it was 3-1. But Newcastle, it could have been 5, Pete, 6. Let's be honest. Newcastle were all over Southampton.
I've got to ask you, Kev, is there a growing case? I mean, I know that football's a changing game now and there's not many traditionalists left with the old 4-4-2, but there seems to be a growing case week on week for Isaac and Callum to possibly start together.
Yeah. I mean, listen, they're both two very good players, Pete. Playing them up top on their own maybe won't work because I think Newcastle have a set way of playing right now. It's really interesting because Isaac's so versatile. He can kind of move in from that left. He could start on the left,
which he prefers.
Which he prefers because he's one-on-one and he gets a little bit more room. In traffic, I think Callum Wilson is probably more happier in the traffic and the rough and tumble in the middle. But Pete, playing both of them, I think he's working. 4-4-2, I'm not so sure. 4-3-3, the way you play, I think seems to work.
I'd give a special mention to Anthony Gordon, and again he got the hook. But I said in this household it could have been any one of them at half time for me. I think that whilst he was unlucky and maybe his finishing could have been a little bit better, Kev, I've heard from our sources here that he's still getting up to speed with fitness levels from when he joined from Everton. But what I do like is that he's showing he's there and he's up for it. So he's not afraid to get involved and take chances. So his time will come, I believe.
Pete, he's a youngster. He's very talented. But at the end of the day, Pete, you guys are going for Champions League football. And if the manager sees something that he needs to change at half time, you've got to make the change. You can't mess around because if you leave it till an hour, you could find yourself 2 down. So bringing Isak on makes Southampton think, oh, hold on a minute. You know, they were happy with him being on the bench. So I think they've done the right thing. Anthony Gordon, he's going to have a good career, Pete. He's got enough talent. And as you say, he's getting up to speed. He's a young player. He'll be fine.
Okay, let's turn our attentions to Sunday then. It's a massive game in all respects. And it was a massive game for Arsenal last time. It still is. But this time, Newcastle's involvement is not protagonists to try and stop Arsenal's run. But Newcastle need the points themselves as well because they're starting to look over their shoulders. So all in all, this so far, a game of the season for both sides, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is at this moment in time. Pete, look, Arsenal have had a fantastic season, as has Newcastle. Look, Arsenal probably, after what happened last season, might have a little bit of an axe to grind a little bit at the way Newcastle took Arsenal apart. Let's be honest. Newcastle, from minute 1 to the final minute, absolutely battered Arsenal. And Arsenal need to turn up. I'm a bit worried defensively because we saw Gabriel go off. But it's a big game for both clubs, Pete. I think if Newcastle get the 3 points, they virtually secure Champions League football. If Arsenal win, Arsenal need to win, obviously, to keep pressure on Manchester City.
Yeah.
Newcastle need to win to kind of secure Champions League football. It's going to be a hell of a game. I mean, it's looking like it's going to be a draw, doesn't it? You know, with so much at stake, these games tend to end in a draw. But I think both teams have to go for it. Newcastle are going to go for it. I think Arsenal have to go for it because if Manchester City ever slipped up, you'd kick yourself for not being in position to capitalise.
And they've got their involvements that, you know, it doesn't matter what a juggernaut City are, Kev. You never know in football. And it just takes a slight, you know, your mindset to be on a Madrid night, on an FA Cup final. It's for the first time a Manchester Cup final. It just takes that slight result, and we all know what can happen in football. As my family always say to me, never have a gamble on the game. But so they've got to be ready, haven't they?
They do have to be ready. Look, I think both teams will be ready. I think Newcastle won't start how they did against Southampton. That's for sure. Can't afford to start like that, Pete, and give Arsenal the upper hand. That's definitely can't happen. and go behind. I think it's going to be how Arsenal approach the game. Arsenal, they're going to want to keep possession. They're going to want to play between the lines. They're going to want to expose your fullbacks if they can. Saka looks a bit jaded against Chelsea. I've got to say that, Pete. He did. He looked a bit. I think the season with a World Cup, it's all catching up with him a little bit. So, I mean, he's virtually haven't had a rest in 2 years, Pete. So he's only 21 years old. So I think you might see a little change here or there. But the approach has to be Arsenal need to attack, because we know Newcastle are going to come on top. Newcastle are going to pressure. Newcastle are going to make life so difficult.
Will Arsenal welcome that on from the start, Kev?
Well, Pete, I feel a lot happier if Gabriel's playing at the back to deal with the physicality of Callum Wilson. If Rob Holding and Kivior play, I've yet to see these two play together. So it's, welcome to the big market. If Callum Wilson gets hold of him, I tell you, because, he can put himself about. He's physical, but he's a good player, Pete. He's a really good player. And he will cause them all sorts of problems just with his presence alone. So will Arsenal welcome it? Probably not, Pete. But do Arsenal have to be able to deal with it to win this game? You're damn right they do.
Very interesting, Kev, because having said that, as brilliant as it all is, the cornerstone of Newcastle's season's been built on defence. Now it's 13 games since they've kept a clean sheet. And I know that that's something that the masters of Arteta, they look at that. And I have to say, where you say jaded, I talked about Sven Botman just a couple of weeks ago. He's learning in the Premier League, and whilst he's a tower of strength at the back, he's only 23. It's his first Premier League season. He looks a little jaded as well. He's been caught napping a couple of times, and I think Arsenal will expose that. I think from a fan's perspective, I'm excited to see how the game starts and who settles into which pattern, because overall that's going to be the deciding factor. Speaking of which, who do you think, let's take Arsenal first, who do you think Arteta and his team will pinpoint as the major person to dictate the game?
I'll be honest with you, I think Thomas Partey's got to play in this game just because of Newcastle's athleticism. On the opposition, I think they're going to have to target Bruno.
Yep.
They're going to have to. He's the one that makes Newcastle tick, Pete. He is the one. He gets on the ball. He's a fantastic player. And if you let him dictate how Newcastle play in the tempo, you're in for a long day. You're in for a long day, James's Park.
Even not fully fit, Kev.
Even not fully fit, Pete. He's still pulling all the strings. He's still that constant at Newcastle that makes everybody better. So I think they're going to have to target him. Yeah, you could look at the defense, and you could look at certain players in defense, but the defense is more of a collective. But I think Bruno, if you get the better of Bruno, I think Arsenal can win the game.
And turning that on its head for Newcastle to look at, Odegaard, he makes everything tick for the middle and in that final quarter.
Yeah, you could say that, Pete, but I don't think Newcastle are going to be thinking like that. I just think Newcastle are going to be thinking, we got to test, especially if Gabriel doesn't play, we've got to test this defence big time. Because Arsenal, as you've said, Newcastle haven't been keeping clean sheet. Arsenal haven't either. Yep. We haven't letting Chelsea score. I mean, come on. Do you know what I mean? So, again, this is the type of game that is a worry for Gunners, because we know Newcastle do carry firepower. Newcastle carry pace, power, and they're a big side. So Arsenal going to have to be able to deal with it. And of late, Arsenal haven't dealt with teams like Newcastle or anything remotely like Newcastle very well. It's a massive game. Arsenal got to turn up, Pete.
And also, Kev, looking at it from the perspective of Newcastle United, and I think it's called Stockholm Syndrome, where people tend to second guess, or they look at past Newcastle fans have always been of a nervous disposition, and I think even when I read a comment last week that even when they were 5-1 up, they were thinking, "Oh, is that enough?" We've all had that feeling as football fans, but with Liverpool on a run. It looks, they've won their last 5, 6 points behind Newcastle. If Newcastle were not to get that result against the Gunners and then go in a little nervy against a Big Sam who possibly could have a new manager bounce for Leeds, will the nerves start to jangle on Tyneside?
Yeah, of course it will, Pete. Look, we're all human, and when you are going for Champions League football and it looks like Liverpool are nowhere to be seen, Pete, all of a sudden they start putting a run together. Typical, big club at the end of the season, putting up five games streak together. And one thing you can't do, Pete, don't look behind you, because the moment you turn, they're up with you and past you. Yeah, they're there. So again, this is why, this is why the Premier League is the best league in the world. There's something to play for virtually every side.
Every game as well.
Exactly. So look, I don't want to take anything away from your game against Leeds, but you got to deal with this one first.
Absolutely.
Newcastle know if they win this game, they are virtually in the Champions League. Let's be honest, you're virtually there. So this is how big a game it is. And what do you say, Pete? You say you got to win your home games. Your home games are the ones you have to win. I also want to say this as well, Pete. Both of these teams are not the same teams who played earlier on in the season.
No,
they're not. And there's a bit more wear and tear on the players. The Newcastle defense ain't the same. Arsenal's attack ain't the same. So Arsenal's defense isn't the same either. So again, it's one of them where it could be a 50-50. I'll go for Arsenal. You go for Newcastle, and it'll probably end in a draw, Pete, knowing our luck.
Well, you preempted our little segment end there, because I do have to ask you for a score. You've done well on the NUFC podcast on Black and White with Arab News. So we're hoping that you'll be mistaken this time out. But as a guest, it's your prerogative to give us a score.
Pete, I think there's going to be goals. I do. I think there's going to be goals in this one. I'm going to go. Listen, I know Newcastle don't concede a lot of goals, but I just think this is a 2-1 game, and I think it's gonna go either way. But I'm going to lean towards Arsenal. I'm going to go Arsenal to win the game 2-1. But Pete, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if it reversed.
Yeah, I've got the same 2-1 and either way, obviously, I'm hoping it's a second half towards the Gallagher end with Newcastle becoming victorious. Because as you say, Kev, if they do that, even Geordie Peter Redding, will think that they've got 1 foot. I might even start dusting my passport off for you.
Love that, Pete. Really, Pete, I love it.
Listen, as always, Kev, it's been fantastic to see you, and I'm no doubt sure we'll welcome you back on to Black and White with Arab News really soon. A quick wrap up, if you will. Newcastle, they did the business against bottom club Southampton, but boy, the Saints made it difficult for them.
Yes, the first half was not what we've expected from Newcastle. I quite expected nothing's easy, but I expected sort of comfortable win, which I suppose in the end it was. I predicted 4-1, it ended up being 3-1, but I guess the way it happened with Southampton taking the lead, and caused a few concerns, I suppose. I know you had your concerns about the first half when we chatted afterwards. I think, again, the positive side is, we've said it a lot about Newcastle from game to game, but also within, like game management within the game itself. They were facing an obstacle and they came through it. And again, I keep saying, it seems like whatever obstacles they have or mini blips, they do come back and solve those solutions. Eddie Howe does. I'm not going to call it masterclass, but really, once again, showed how his game management, and once again, Callum Wilson's coached twice. He has managed that forward line so well between Callum Wilson and Alexander Isak. It was only about a month ago he was saying, well, who should be starting?
You are starting to forge an understanding together, Ali.
Yeah, and it's whenever he seems to play one or the other, or like one of them comes on and they have an understand, they play as a partnership. They have an understanding, as you said, and I think the management of the whole team across, the whole team in terms of like rotation has been excellent, but certainly up front it's been brilliant, and both of them are delivering.
Great stuff. Listen, okay, on to the big one, which is we all know what's at stake here, but just to recap for our listeners. So Newcastle United can possibly put one foot and maybe their back heel into the Champions League. It would all but do it, wouldn't it, Ali? It would probably be the end of Arsenal's title intentions if the Toon Army were to prevail this weekend. If Arsenal win, it prolongs possibly the Toon's entry into the Champions League and might sow a little bit of doubt into the fans that have experienced all this before. We won't go down that road. We like to be positive on here, but there's a lot at stake this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a cup final, it has a feel of a cup final or a winner takes all for different reasons. I mean, they're not fighting for the same thing, but obviously Newcastle at home, the crowd is going to be really up for this one, because I honestly believe if they beat Arsenal, I really cannot see how they won't be in the Champions League next season. Mathematically, it would still be possible, but it really would require them almost losing all the remaining games and Liverpool winning every single game. And which, even with that, I mean, I'm not sure about the mathematics of it. That would actually probably would do it. But running out of games, Liverpool already down to their last 4 games, and Newcastle have 5 games left, I believe. So, for Liverpool to get into the Champions League, they've been on a good run, but they would require Newcastle or Manchester United to drop like 9 or 10 points, here and there, which is,
I think the max, Ali, is that Liverpool can max out on 71.
And United, I mean, Manchester United just need to win 3 of their last 6 games to overtake that, So, I feel like Liverpool, there's an acceptance at Liverpool, and while Newcastle, Eddie Howe and the fans and everyone is being cautious. Nobody wants,
and me.
Yeah, and particularly you. But I think deep down, almost everyone really believes that it's really close now, and I just think this is a perfect game for it because so much is at stake. As you mentioned, I think a defeat for Arsenal will almost end the title race. It's already massively in favor of Manchester City anyway, So, but a defeat here would almost but wrap it up, I think, especially if City win their corresponding game this weekend. For Newcastle, I do think a win here at home against Arsenal, massive game. The corresponding game last season was one of the best of the season near the end, and Newcastle won 2-0. I can see a similar atmosphere, the crowd being really up for it, and I see a Newcastle win.
Good stuff. Let's take a look, though, in detail where this game could be won and lost. I mentioned it at the top of the pod, and I mentioned it last week. Newcastle, for all that we've lauded, tight back 4 and a team built on a defensive strategy, and the press, they haven't kept a clean sheet in donkey's years. It's 13 games, so I think that Arsenal would possibly look at that, and you would probably target Bruno for Newcastle and Odegaard at Arsenal as being possibly key representatives for how this game could go.
Yeah, I mean, for regarding the clean sheets, I mean, this would include, don't forget, there were mitigating circumstances. I'm not making excuses for Newcastle, but obviously Nick Pope sending off, there was a little bit of, uncertainty at the time. Obviously, he was out for a while. There was a cup final, few difficult games, the Man City game in particular, and so yes, it is 13 games since they've had a clean sheet, but with the exception of the Villa match, they haven't really conceded a lot either. You can't say they're leaking goals. No, I mean, they probably concede on average 1 a match, which if now this is against Arsenal, obviously, who are very good, so you'd expect, Arsenal to really be up for it and go for it as well. I mean, they a draw is of no use to them, so they will be going for goals. I think while I could see Newcastle conceding, I still think they'll the forward line's playing so well at the moment that should win. And I think you do mention you mentioned after Villa maybe a few seeds of doubt in Newcastle minds. They've come back really strongly. Well, I think with Arsenal, I know they won their last game against Chelsea as well, but there would be seeds of doubt in their minds, and I think it's a little bit more than seeds of doubt. I think it's with Arsenal, it's almost full on. Wouldn't say panic, but like they know they've got no margin for error now.
No,
so
they've run out of games.
They've run out of games. And City are starting to win those games in hand. For a while it was City just had played less games, but we're still behind Arsenal. But now they keep winning those games in hand. Haaland is flying and all that. So Arsenal know, this is an absolute must-win. It's not a must-win for Newcastle, but I'm sure they'd love to do it in front of their own fans. Make a statement against Arsenal, and like you said, it'll be Champions League football almost done.
Quite a statement in the fact of returning to positivity, Ali, and it's something that you've championed throughout the season of goals. There's goals aplenty at St James's at the moment. You look at 5-6 against Spurs, 5 against West Ham, 4 and then 3 against Southampton. So there's goals in that team, which is somewhat making up for if there was a queen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even with I wouldn't call them defensive problems, but you mentioned the lack of clean sheets. You can see that even if Arsenal, do score, even if Arsenal take the lead, or like if it's a high scoring game, Newcastle won't be out of it because of that. How well the forward line is performing. I don't think this is as we keep saying, it's a new Newcastle. They've got a lot of resilience. I don't think they'll concede a lot, but should it be a slightly high scoring game, I would still fancy them to win it because, like I said, just the forward line is playing so well. Callum Wilson is like a new man. I think it's just a completely different player to the one we saw around the cup final.
Hungry, lean, and amongst the goals. Listen, someone else who might not be too far away from being among the goals, and it would be great to have on the bench because, as you said a couple of weeks back, it's not a case of having substitutes now, but it's about rotation. Rotation's the word, Ali, isn't it? Not really substitutions. Alan St. Maximin back in training. Great to see him as well. Always an outlet that could be there. But in terms of having this, what we would call 2 5-a-side teams, AK, Newcastle, look, they've got strength and depth.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with Alan St. Maximin himself, I think you would imagine this is the kind of game that he'd enjoy, like we saw how much he enjoyed playing against Manchester City early in the season in the 3-3 draw. He had one of his better games, one of the best games, I should say. And I think, he often rises to the occasion in big games when there's a lot of attention and all that. I'm not suggesting he only does it in big games, but like we do sometimes question about consistency and all that. You could imagine this will be something that he will really relish, and as you say, look, the strength in depth is slowly, over the last year or so has improved massively for Newcastle. I think, we focus a lot on the forwards as well. Like if things aren't going well, whoever he brings on seems to work, and it's whether it's Wilson coming on or Alexander Isak coming on. But, with people coming back from injuries as well, you get the feeling that that's the same from in midfield as well. I mean, a few weeks ago we were saying, should Joe Linton get his first team go straight back into the team, or should he wait on the bench? That's not a bad problem to have. As they say, Joe Linton, who earlier was you think undroppable, and now the team is playing so well with whoever comes in seems to be doing the job. That players returning from injuries are waiting their turn, and I'm sure it's a problem that Eddie Howe is very much enjoying.
Brilliant. I read such a good report about Eddie Howe that he is the young assassin. He has the innocent, angelic face, but he is basically destroying all before him, and long may it continue. There was great footage of which we saw earlier this week, Ali, of Eddie receiving his loser's medal in front of Yasser, the Newcastle United chairman. Great footage of the players going up the famous steps at Wembley to receive their runners-up medal. And Eddie Howe looked absolutely distraught, and you can see him mouthing to the owners, "I'm sorry." And they were like, no. And you can tell that it hurts. But someone made a very good point, Ali, that in the long run, that defeat in the cup final has sent Newcastle United on a trajectory again, which hopefully will prove in Champions League football.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I said it at the time, And I seem like to have repeated that in every pod we've discussed since, because we keep focusing on what's happening now in the Champions League, in the race for the Champions League, is that for all the glamour of the cup final, and a lot of Newcastle fans said quite rightly, we'll take a trophy over anything else, because it's about time. And that's the right attitude, you really should, no one should be thinking, oh, you know what, we should forget the cup finals, we should be focusing on. However, what I disagree with is that, that should Newcastle have won that, and obviously in the end they didn't, then, you'd be like, right, I'm satisfied, because regardless of the result of the cup final, they were going to go back to the Champions League race, and all these league games, important league games. And, had they fallen off, nobody would have thought, oh, well, we won the cup, we're fine. There would have been massive disappointment. There would be absolute massive disappointment if they hadn't carried on. And as you mentioned, it seems like somehow from that defeat in the Carabao Cup final, the team has emerged really stronger. They had that tough couple of games, but, they've come back with a lot of resilience and again, I keep saying it, they keep finding, solutions to what few problems they've had. They seem to overcome them in style. And I think third place is very much on now, as well. Not just, Champions League football. Third place could be on. And I think once should that be achieved, I'm not going to say it's 100% because you keep calling me on it. But once that's achieved, if it's achieved, the memories of the Carabao Cup final for Eddie Howe, for the fans, and for the owners, as you mentioned, will be forgotten, really, I think.
A distant memory.
Yeah.
Listen, a massive thanks to Kevin Campbell for joining us from the North Bank Highbury. Great to have Super Kevin Campbell on and get his take on the big game of the weekend. But the last word, as always, and probably the most important prediction he's ever done on this Black and White with Arab News podcast is this one. But I'm going to give you a double challenge, Ali. So before we do that, I want to give you two predictions because there's two massive games, as you've said, this week. So give us a prediction for Al Hilal, but also for Newcastle United.
It's a tough one, Al Hilal. I'm gonna be positive and think Al Hilal will find a way. I'm gonna go a little bit specific as well. Maybe another draw and a win on penalties for Al Hilal.
Wow. Yeah. That would be nail-biting stuff.
Yeah.
But great stuff. And for the tune?
2-1 to Newcastle.
2-1 to Newcastle United. We'll take that all day, and we'll take it with a penalty shootout for our brothers and sisters in Saudi Arabia. Listen, that's it for another episode. Hopefully when we're back next week, we'll be celebrating a famous victory at St. James's Park. Until then, we'll see you next week on Black and White with Arab News. How are the lads?